I'm not going to lie, and I kind of looked at going to a different unit, and one of the kind of depot kind of instructors said to me, he says, if you do that, you'll regret it for the rest of your life, you know. And he was bang on, you know. I'm glad I pushed on through and kind of made it through training, and then kind of went to the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment of the British Army. I was kind of a troubled kid, involved in a lot of violence through my teenage years, and I ended up getting quite badly assaulted when I was 16 years of age. I had sort of 16 stitches in my eye from a glass that was smashed in the face, broken nose, fractured jaw, and just kind of, my old man, my dad, he was like, you either go in the military or you're going to end up in prison, and he was very, very right, you know? So that's how come I ended up in the Parachute Regiment.
What's up, everybody? This is Simon. On this episode of The Ideal Hour, I have Chris Binch on the podcast. He is an ex-paratrooper. He's got firefighting experience. He's got the Old Paratrooper podcast. We are going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about a lot of things that are going on in the world today. And he's also done some surveillance, which is going to be an interesting topic as well. Chris, thanks for joining me here on The Ideal Hour.
No, thank you very much for having me. The pleasure's all mine.
Oh, it's shared. It's shared. I appreciate that. All right, so let's get right into it, my man. You want to come on the podcast? You're a former paratrooper. Why be a paratrooper? What did it entail? What's the story here?
Well, to be honest, you know, I was always going to join the military, but I didn't know what to join, and I decided to become a paratrooper pretty much about 2 hours before going to the careers office. It was at my best friend came with me, and he was like, well, you know, I've heard about this unit called the Paras. Why don't we go for them? And I was like, well, that sounds cool. Knew nothing really about them and the training involved. Just kind of turn up, sign on the line, and then maybe 3-4 months down the line, I was at the kind of training center and doing all the pre-stuff. And then that's what I realized when I realized what I'd let myself in for, you know. What
was the training like for it? I mean, what was the how does one become a paratrooper? Like, what is entailed?
So we have the Royal Marines and the Parachute Regiment, which are our 2 elite units, you know, kind of like your airborne and you kind of your Marines. It's sort of 28 weeks to 30 weeks of training. You kind of have 12 weeks basic training, and then you go on and do your phase 2 training, and that accumulates towards the end where you do something called P Company, which is a week of tests. There's 2 tests a day designed to push you mentally and physically. If you get through that, it took me 3 attempts. I did P Company 3 times in 6 months. I don't think there's many of us that kind of did it 3 times. And
you put yourself 3 times through this process. I mean, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I know it was. I sometimes wonder, but I think that's where the arthritis in the ankles comes from now. But no, I went through it 3 times, and I think I used to be quite ashamed of that in the past. I used to be a bit like, well, you know, I never really used to share it. But now I'm quite proud of the fact that I pushed myself through it 3 times and finally got there, you know.
Absolutely. I think that's like a feat. I mean, people are usually too proud to, especially in that space, to, to admit defeat, or they don't even come back and quit. That, you know, that's what I was going to say. It's like you're mentally strong to lose the, so to speak, title fight, come right back to it, lose it again, and say, no, I deserve to get another shot. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a pretty big achievement.
Yeah, well, I wavered after the 2nd time. I'm not going to lie. And I kind of looked at going to a different unit. And one of the kind of depot kind of instructors said to me, he says, if you do that, you'll regret it for the rest of your life, you know. And he was bang on. You know, I'm glad I pushed on through and kind of made it through training, and then kind of went to the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment of the British Army.
Wow. You know what, to your point and to the audience listening out there, I think if you're going to want to do something or fight for something or anything of that nature, go all the way in, and until you say, hey, I've done my best. I've given all that I had to get there. And And I'm glad you did that. And that goes for business as well, right? Like anything in business related, if you do everything you can to, when you walk away from something, you know, you've done your best, you know what I mean? And then you could accept the defeat if it happens. All right. So a little bit about your early years in life. What do you want to share with us? I mean, you know, what is it that inspired you to maybe start a podcast? I'm sure you got some crazy stories through you know, through how you were brought up and where you ended up and the Marines or the British paratrooper.
Well, hold on a minute there. Don't start tarring me with that Marine brush. You know, there'll be problems. They're our arch rivals back here, okay? There's a big rivalry between the two.
Between you guys?
Oh, God, the rivalry between the Royal Marines and the Parachute Regiment is legendary. It dates back for years. We claim we're the best, which we obviously are, and they claim they're the best, which obviously they're not, you know? So it's the way it goes.
Do you guys ever work together on things? I mean, in kind of training?
Yeah, well, not necessarily through training, but now we have what's called Special Forces Support Group, and this came about a few years ago where they took a battalion of paratroopers, a company of Royal Marines, and then some of the Royal Air Force, and created this support group that kind of assists with the SAS on a lot of operations. So we do work, and I joke, you know, we have a mutual respect for the Marines, but that rivalry, that's something that keeps us striving to be better, you know.
Yeah, you guys are better at each other.
Trying to beat them, yeah.
You know, I've had several Navy SEALs as well on the podcast. You know, they're always interesting people. The mind that they have is kind of very similar to what you've described earlier on. Just as we got started, is there's no off ramp or no road that they take off. It's either get the mission done or that's it. They're like, I think they would die or not get it done. You know what I mean? It's
absolutely. Well, I had 𝐂𝐢𝐦𝐿 on my podcast quite recently, and
you did.
You know, we were sharing kind of stories off air, and you know, the mentality, whatever kind of unit you're in, whether that, you know, throughout the militaries around the world, we share this sort of camaraderie and, you know, that strive to kind of want to be the best and stuff like that. So I think it's shared sort of worldwide, you know.
I love that. What were some of the experiences you had as a paratrooper? Like, is there any crazy stories you want to talk about? Are they top secret or?
No. If I told you half the stuff that we got up to, I kind of probably you wouldn't believe me, and probably you'd get cancelled as a podcast, and probably so would I. So. I mean, I served for 7 years, and how I ended up in the Parachute Regiment anyway, and in the military, I had a bit of a troubled kind of youth through various bits and bobs. And unbeknown to me, I had undiagnosed ADHD as a child. I know everyone thinks they've got ADHD now, and I think, you know, there's varying levels. But yeah, I was kind of a troubled kid. Involved in a lot of violence through my teenage years, and I ended up getting quite badly assaulted when I was 16 years of age. I had sort of 16 stitches in my eye from a glass that was smashed in my face, broken nose, fractured jaw, and just kind of my old man, my dad, he was like, you either go in the military or you're going to end up in prison, and he was very, very right. So that's how come I ended up in the Parachute Regiment. Spent 7 years, served in Afghanistan. We did Sierra Leone in 2000. When that all kind of kicked off, Macedonia, and then 3 tours of Northern Ireland. But yeah, we played hard and we fought hard. You know, I think everyone assumed that me going into the military was going to straighten me out. And it did with certain aspects, but the fighting and the scrapping in the pubs and clubs, you know, in and around where we were based was just crazy.
It brought out the beast in you.
Oh, God, yeah. You know, and it's a difficult one because you sent and you trained to be this, and I don't want to sound corny, but you train to be this kind of animal that, you know, that wants to go into battles, and then you're expected to kind of turn it off again when you go for a pint or a beer. You know, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's interesting how that restraint is expected, right? I mean, it's almost like a UFC fighter at a bar. And they get tested, and they're like, "Wait a minute, I can't." You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is that how you got the stitches? A bar fight, or what happened?
That was a bar fight when I was 16. That was prior to joining, but someone smashed a pint in my straight in my face, and ended up with 16 stitches.
Luckily, they missed the eye, right? That was it must have been very close to the eye.
It was, yeah. It's literally right around my eye socket. The ridge of the glass caught my eye socket, and
Jesus,
it was quite. I mean, I've got stitches all over me from being hit on the head with various things. I don't really recognize that person anymore. But I have like scars all over my head from various tussles and that. And I boxed quite early on as well. I kind of boxed for a little bit for the military and stuff, and then got onto it later on in life.
They say each scar tells a story, so I'm sure you got quite a lot to share there. What about your friends? Like when you go out, are you like before? I'm sure if you went out, were you looking for trouble or were you looking for a good time? There's like that type of personality, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, like I never really went looking for it. So I'm quite a big guy, and I was a big guy when I was I was about 85, 90 kilogram and 6'2" when I was 17.
Okay.
So, you kind of, I was a big guy. So a lot of my friends would get into trouble and then look to me to help them out. So whichever way happened, I got roped into it. And I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy it, but I've never ever really started a fight. I've just been in, sort of end up getting roped. Look, I had no arguments about getting roped into it. I'm not going to lie, but it was just the way it was. And I think times have changed. My lad, I've got a young lad and a girl that he's sort of turning 15, and he was shocked when he got to secondary school because he was like, "You never guess what happened today, Dad?" And I was like, "What?" And he went, "There was a fight."
Oh my God!
And I was like, "Right," expecting a bit more because they're not exposed to it. I don't think as much as we were growing in the 90s.
It's interesting how that is. It's like it's almost it's not just in school, like it's also in professional sports. I feel like people are like athletes are more buddy. There's not as much as rivalries. Like back in the day, athletes even would hate each other. Kids at school would just fight and it'd be okay. The parents wouldn't even worry about like a lawsuit or something. Nowadays a kid gets in the fight with another kid, you're freaking out that something's gonna lead to something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And our soccer games back in the 90s, they were studs up, there were injuries and people harsh tackles. It was a contact sport. Now it's not, the slightest touch. It's a non-contact sport. Really? So that aspect has changed.
Really. And so let me ask you, soccer or football, when I went out and saw a live game, it was like intense and the fans were intense. Is it getting a little watered down, kind of like maybe some American sports where people are just relaxing and it's not as physical, or what?
Well, I think that, football through the 90s was kind of associated massively with football hooliganism. That was massive. And, rightly or wrongly, that's the way it was. And I think it has now, society as a whole has kind of calmed down a little bit with them sort of things. So I don't think there's as much violence as there was. I think CCTV plays a big part in that. Years ago, people could get away with it.
Hey, can you imagine if you had CCTV when you were younger? You'd be in trouble, my man. You wouldn't be here.
I'd be in prison. There'd be no question.
You wouldn't be here talking to me, and you wouldn't be talking to your guests on your podcast. That's funny. And you know what? I think CCTV or cameras or security cameras, they call them in America. I think it also took down the mob and any other faction, because like you just can't do anything anymore without someone watching, right?
Yeah, I mean, it has its advantages. Obviously, it stops serious crime, which is obviously a good thing. And I'm not condoning violence of any shape or form, but that going out and drinking and getting in a bit of a tussle, you found out who you were, and it was experiences that you can lead on in later life, how to defend yourself and stuff. And without them experiences, I wouldn't be the person I am now, and probably you're the same,
Yeah, you wouldn't be as tough. Oh, no, for sure. I've been in my share of tussles here and there. And, I told my wife many times I said, hey, thank God there's no, cameras around, and you never know, and I did one time I was in Las Vegas. Funny enough, someone said something and I got involved, and then after the nightclubs and so forth, drinking, and we were at a restaurant, and all of a sudden the fight breaks out, and all of a sudden I catch a battery charge. Had to get lawyers and this, but luckily, and it was a lot of statements against mine, but there was a camera or a statement made in reverse by the bartenders or by the staff, and that cleared me. And I was like, thank God. It still costs a lot of money, but that was dropped.
Yeah. So they have their advantages, you know.
Yeah. So they do. All right. So let's talk about security. And you mentioned, or I have something in regards to security, that you do surveillance. What is it that you do there, and what is required of it? What do you do there?
Well, I have not done that for a number of years. Okay. So it all came about. So I went to work in Iraq for 6 odd years on the close protection market. At the second Gulf War, it opened up the market for ex-soldiers. I did that for a number of years. Some really, really close calls, and working on US contracts actually.
Oh, really? So you were you were contracted privately or through the government, or how would it work? Privately. To protect people or to go after people?
Yeah, I was actually on my last sort of contract was for a guy called Colonel Aninos. He did work at the Pentagon, and he was responsible for the kind of rebuilding and the restructuring of Iraq. Oh, so he had his sort of private security team that provided by the company I worked for, and we escorted him to sites all over kind of Iraq, pretty much Iraq-wide, as well as a 12-man security team.
That's incredible. So, what is the level of danger there? I mean, you're probably freaking out.
Yeah, it's a weird one because I started it at 24. I left the military after 7 years and then did that. And I was walking. The first contract I did, I was driving around in soft-skin vehicles in Baghdad, in non-armored vehicles, just kind of with a beard and a sort of Arab headdress on, trying to blend in and stuff. I used to travel up and down Route Irish 7 or 8 times a day in a soft-skin vehicle. And Route Irish was arguably the most dangerous road in the world for a number of years.
Were there shootings going in and out?
Yeah, shootings all the time. But we started a new kind of thing where all the security teams used 4x4s and plowed their way through the traffic, highlighting themselves. We kind of blended in with the traffic, used normal cars. And it really worked for a period of time until word got out, and then the attack started again and stuff like that. But yeah, I've been IED quite a few times, and I'm deaf in this ear because of that. So
wow. During these security details, did you ever have to pull over and really engage, or were you fortunate enough not to?
No, the closest call I had, and I have the video footage. Actually, I was on a contract for a British company. They were called ADHD. Now, some of your viewers and followers will probably would have heard of them. They were quite a prominent close protection company, bodyguard security company. And I was on a separate contract to the main contract, and it was called Op-Tourist. Everyone nicknamed it Op-Tourniquet because it was absolutely bonkers. So we had 3 armored Land Cruisers. One of them had a camera on, and we were filming every street and MSR and kind of road in the Baghdad area for US intelligence.
Oh, wow.
As a private contract. So yeah, Boxing Day 2008, we drove into what should have been a busy marketplace, and we got ambushed. My truck had multiple holes in. My rear gunner, Matt, he killed 3 insurgents.
Oh, wow.
And we were lucky enough to drive out of it. But I have the footage. The guy that was, I was driving the third vehicle, the Charlie vehicle, and he was taking pictures as part of the contract. And he dropped the camera and it hits record and records from the footwell and catches the whole thing. It's only about 3 or 4 minutes. Trust me, it felt a lot longer.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, it was quite interesting, and it was deemed. It wasn't too long after that. But I always joke that I've had sort of several lives, like a sort of 9 lives like a cat, because I've been in the wrong place or the right place at the wrong time, or vice versa. That mean that I've avoided being killed.
Yeah.
This has happened throughout, and this has even happened in the fire service as well. So
Wow.
someone up there is watching down on me.
That some people say if it's not your time to clock out, it's not your time. You know what I mean? It's do you believe in that kind of saying?
Yeah, well, I think you've got to, because stuff like we swapped vehicles on one particular day, and I always drove the Charlie vehicle, and I ended up driving the Alpha vehicle. And on that particular day, the Charlie vehicle got hit, and the driver was really, really badly injured and nearly lost his legs.
Oh my God.
So it was one of them. It was just a spare of the moment. He was like, "Do you want to swap?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And that's just kind of how it panned out.
My God. Let me ask you, in this type of, obviously you're mentally strong, but in this type of scenario where you're seeing a teammate or someone that you're working alongside with, you've gotten to know over the years, because you mentioned a 6-year detail in Iraq, someone gets hit, gets this badly injured. What goes through your mind in this chaotic, I'm talking like this scene's probably extremely chaotic, but what goes through your mind? Do I help this person? Do I protect myself? Are you panicking? Are you focused? Is this a scenario you've trained for? I mean, seeing flesh and blood and people missing limbs, this is something different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is a difficult one. I think if people tell you that they're not panicking inside, or there's an element of panic there, I think that they're either psychotic or they're kind of lying, because of course there is, it's human nature, but also you have a level of training. And that's why we train in all walks of kind of these industries. The fire service is the same. And I always liken it to, you train and train and train, and you do the drills over and over again. So when it does go wrong, you almost do it on autopilot. And that is the same as the fire service now. So we train a lot. We do lots of drills, so that 2 o'clock in the morning, when you get turned out to a house fire and there's people hanging out of windows, you're not thinking how you put up the ladder. You're not thinking what you run out the hose. You're on autopilot because it's drilled into you. You're almost oblivious to the risk around you, if that makes kind of sense.
It does. I had very interesting. I had Jamie Pinnell from the SAS also. He came on the podcast, and he mentioned, when we went in, I think he did the hotel in Kabul, that hostage situation. He said when we went in, it just became very autopilot like, where it's you're just focused on what you're doing, and everything around you just doesn't kind of matter in terms of your focus, right? And I guess training does that. That's pretty good. We've talked about a little bit, you mentioned, I should say, about being a firefighter and your training as a firefighter. Are you currently one right now? Okay.
I am. I've been a firefighter now for 12 years. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Very good. As a professional firefighter, do you think the fires in LA were potentially mismanaged by maybe government, or like what's your professional take on it from what you've read or understood it to be?
I tend not to watch too much from the media.
Okay.
I try and get my kind of information, from podcasts, because I believe people are a lot more honest. The media tend to,
skew it,
from my experiences, twist off and everything else. So I have seen some celebrities speaking out, and I'm not a big conspiracist. I'm not gonna, but I always sit on the fence, and I never rule anything out. There are lots of things that's happened in the past, and I sit on the fence, and I look at both options, say, well, that's a possibility, but I don't know the kind of infrastructure, not the infrastructure, but the political kind of situation in America, and why it would make sense to do that, because I don't know enough about it. So I wouldn't really like to comment on that.
No problem. I understand. And I agree with you. I think the media skews things towards a narrative, not only for a financial gain, but also for a control game. Some of the things they were mentioning as fire hydrants not having water, which seems a little crazy. Has that ever happened in a fire that you've tended to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
it does happen. You go to some hydrants, and they are kind of stuff that's carried out on the hydrants, like maintenance and stuff. But you might get to one that doesn't work. That does happen.
It does.
And it happens quite commonly. You'll turn up and you'll be lucky enough there'll be one within one sort of length of hose away from your truck. You can plug it in and then you'll try and nothing will come out. Wow. And it's not that the hydrants are dry. It's just, it's broken. This happened. Or they're frozen. Sometimes they seize up. So, I mean, I just don't know why. I don't know how they could make the hydrants empty as well, because this all connects to your water supplies.
Yeah, to one big pipe or so forth that fills it
so
in.
if you start turning off hydrants, I think a lot of properties would be without water as well. I mean, I could be wrong, but...
Let me ask you, from a firefighter perspective, I've seen, with this kind of crazy fire that happened in LA, I've seen people or companies now advertising sprinklers on their houses. So basically, they would build a piping system to the sprinklers of their home and the surrounding, kind of almost like an umbrella of water, so to speak, the opposite. Is that something you think that could prevent, like, should this be part of building codes in the future, maybe, where they put some type of sprinklers around? Would it work? Or do you think it's once a fire hits, it's it?
Well, no, you have sprinklers in your kind of bigger, larger businesses and buildings.
Yep.
So there is the potential for it to work, but it's the same. We still go to loads of properties now where people still don't have smoke alarms.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of one of them. You can give out all this information and say this is a good thing, but people will still make their own choices, and you will still get people, no smoke alarms, no extinguishers, no sprinklers. And, you're still going to get house fires, whether that may lower. We see a trend for a lot of years. They dropped. And over the last 2 or 3 years, they've kind of started to speak back up again over in this country. And you just never know. It's a really weird one. You might have a quiet time, and then all of a sudden it's crazy.
What's your work schedule like? Do you do like 2 days on, 3 days off, or 3 days on? What do you guys do?
So we do 2 days, 2 nights, 4 off.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they're 12-hour shifts. So you do 12-hour days and then do 12-hour nights, and then you get your 4 days off. So, and you can choose to go in for overtime or extra hours on your 4 days off if that's available.
When it's downtime, what do you guys do at the fire station?
Well, sadly, I think the American fire service is very, very different to the UK fire service, and that's all I'll say on that. We kind of we don't sleep on nights anymore. They took away our beds a long time ago, and we get an element of rest and stuff like that, but we still kind of, it's an ever-changing kind of fire service is what I'll go with.
So they don't let you sleep there anymore, huh?
No, and this is the kind of weird bit. It's always been I don't know. I think the members of public don't really care. I've always kind of thought that surely a member of public would be happy that we did, so we're well rested if we got called to a fire. But it's the sign of the times, and it is what it is. We've kind of adjusted to that now, and it's just part of the job. You go back 20, 30 years ago, there were bars at the fire station.
That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think it's one of them things. It's a sign of the times. Things change. We adapt. And, I think there was a lot of moaning at the start when it kind of happened, as you'd expect. But it's just now we take it as part and parcel.
So you can't bring a blow-up mattress either.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but
I see. They just said no stationary bed. You can blow one up and down.
It weighs around everything.
Oh man. It's interesting, the regulations and the rules, and then things change, and then what's allowed is not allowed 5 years later, so forth. Just funny how that is. All right, let's talk about mental health, man. You're a mental health advocate. It's obviously you've been through pressure situations here and there, and life hits you as well. And you grew up, tough, and then had to change your ways, and then had to control yourself in really dangerous areas. You mentioned ADHD earlier. Like, let's talk about that. Is that covered a lot on your podcast? What do you notice about it? And as a man,
So no, basically in the professions, that from the security work in Iraq to the anti-piracy off the coast of Somalia, and the military and all that kind of stuff, you know, you do see stuff, you do experience sort of nasty things, and it's kind of how you, and I'm very, very fortunate that in the time I've been doing over the last 20, 25 years, all the stuff I've done, I've never really had a massive struggle with mental health. But sort of 6, 7 years ago, I kind of went into like depression. And I went to see my sort of doctor, and very, very quickly they wanted to give me antidepressants. Within 30 seconds, they were like, "Oh, we'll give you antidepressants." And I was like, "Well, okay." So I took the prescription, I went and got antidepressants, and then I never took them because I didn't want to mask. And look, antidepressants are good for some people, they work for some people. For me, I didn't think it was the right course of action.
I agree.
So I kind of decided that I wasn't going to take them. I was going to kind of look at other routes and
alternatives.
Yeah, and at this time I got with my fiance that she is now, Hannah. She's also a firefighter.
Oh, wow.
And she said, "Look, I don't mean to take this, mean this in a disrespectful way, but have you ever thought about getting yourself checked out? Because you don't think straight, you're not normal." And I was like, "Oh, cheers, thank you very much." But yeah, so I kind of did a bit of research, went down. I didn't go down the diagnosis route because I didn't really see the point. I have a few friends that are GPs, that are doctors, and they told me, signposted me to kind of questionnaires and stuff like that you need to. I did several, and they all come back pretty much conclusive that I had ADHD, which then suddenly explained how my brain works. And it was like a breath of fresh air. So for years, I'd not known how my brain kind of worked. And then all of a sudden, I've got this clarity of like, that's why I do what I do. That's why I've got about 18 million tasks going off at once. I can be unloading a washing machine, making a dinner, doing something else, half cutting the lawn, and I'm like doing a million things at once. And that's kind of one of the things. And one of the main things of it is you kind of seek adrenaline. You seek the dopamine, and you seek high pressure situations. And that explains why I've done what I've done over the years. I'm constantly trying to get that hit of dopamine or that kind of adrenaline rush from the professions and stuff I've done, So it explained a lot, and it's helped me. I'm not a big fan of labels. I say it all the time. You can be labeled anything you want. People label you stuff, and sometimes that sticks. But if it helps people understand how their own brain works, then I'm a massive kind of advocate for that. And for me, it really, really 6, 7 years ago changed my life, having that kind of understanding of how my own brain works. So
I love that. It's you're not the only one. It seems like other podcasters have talked about it. Even I saw Dana White talk about, doctors, you go visit a doctor, all of a sudden they just want to prescribe you something right away. That's like, they don't even know, like you mentioned, within 30 seconds or so forth, they're like, "Here, take this and you should be fixed." It's like, it doesn't work really that way, right? Like you got to know.
You're just masking it. You're just kind of masking it. And in my opinion, again, I'm no expert, and I don't want the people to see this and take my advice as the way. But if people, it may work for some people. I felt like it was just mask. All I was doing was taking some medication that were going to numb my feelings and put me on a level. Now, I don't want to be on a level where I'm not happy or I'm sad. I want to have them highs of being happy, and I want to have them lows when you're sad. It's just how you kind of manage your own emotions and everything else. And just by taking a tablet, kind of, I don't think for me would have helped.
It's interesting. Of course, it's a financial thing for them as well. I think they get bonuses and so forth to prescribe. And but you're right. I think in the past, masking it is a big key. They used to do that in mental hospitals, right? They would zero you out to where, the bigger doses, obviously, but they would zero you out to a flat line where you're not questioning or arguing or yelling or whatever it may be. I personally just, and listen, for some it may work and some people need it, and I know both, but I've personally been the route of like naturally trying to fight something off, or naturally adjusting to whatever scenario it is, whether it's through communication or exercise or things of that nature. Especially with, I think, depression. I think the first sign that I noticed for depression, even myself when I had a little bit, it was sleep. You tend to want to sleep. I don't know if you felt that, but like you want to take a nap all of a sudden, you know, and it's and it's your mind almost shutting you down, like kind of like a computer that gets hot, where it's saying, "Hey, go to bed. Something's off." Did you feel that? Was that your first sign? How did you know you had depression and you had to combat it?
Well, that's what I mean. The kind of for me, and the points I try and bring up on my podcast is it's not always depression, and some of the symptoms linked with ADHD can be very, very much mistaken for depression. So that's the kind of route. I thought I had depression, and as it turns out, it was one of the symptoms of
from
my
ADHD.
ADHD.
Oh, I see. Have you ever personally been depressed? Like, have you felt personally that maybe, aside from the ADHD, like, have you, or guests on your podcast, have they admitted it? Because I've had guests on my podcast where they've admitted the depression or talked about it, and then even suicide got mentioned into these conversations. Just the thought of it, which is crazy, right? But often than not, for some reason, it comes up in these conversations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've had guests on that that have tried to take their own lives on multiple occasions through PTSD, depression, anxiety, and things like that. And then you're right, that is one of the things. It's taking yourself off, tired, lack of energy, sort of lack of enthusiasm to do anything. But again, I think it can affect people in very, very different ways. People turn to alcohol, they turn to drugs to kind of, support it. There's all sorts of things. And I think it's a case by case, certainly a case by case sort of way to look at it. That's what I've found anyway, and everyone's different with it. So.
As a veteran yourself, what advice do you give other veterans that are struggling with post-traumatic stress or or any kind of the symptoms that maybe you felt or others that you've experienced through your podcast felt? It's
just this getting rid of that stigma that it's okay to talk about it. And even now in 2025, we have this stigma that you can't talk about your feelings because it's a sign of weakness. And this still happens a lot. So again, the idea with the podcast was if I can get some of the people I've had on, former firefighters, former special forces, heavyweight boxers, all sorts of people, actors. I've just had Burke Floyd on recently. His episode will be out in a couple of weeks. We just talk about how it's okay. So if people can see these people talking about their own struggles, I'm hoping that people will sit and go, well, it's okay to talk about it. And I think the first thing with anything like that is accepting there is a problem. You need to literally accept there's a problem, and then you need to seek help. Now, some people can deal with it on their own, but I think they're very few and far between. I think people need a support network around them. People need to watch out for them. Like you say, the buddy system. Right? But certainly the biggest thing is actually seeking and getting that help that you need, and admitting that there might be something wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If you don't think you have a problem and you're not going to address it, right? It's kind of the first step, so to speak. The podcasts that you've had, what are some of the memorable exchanges? Like, what have you learned from the podcasts that you've had? I've had my own, obviously, but it's about you. What are, like, do you regret doing it? What are some of the things you've gained or benefited from having a podcast on a spiritual level or emotional or growth?
No, I like how we talked about my brain. I need to keep my brain active. And that's why I kind of turned to boxing quite a few years ago, because I needed something to really channel my sort of brain into, as it were. And I get what's called another symptom of ADHD is becoming hyper-focused. So if you don't like something, it doesn't matter how much someone throws it in your face, you're not going to like it. And there'll be no enthusiasm there when you're doing it. But if you're into something, you're into it full on and you become hyper focused with it. So for me, for many years, it was boxing. Now I'm too old, sadly, and I've got that many frigging injuries. It's ridiculous. So I kind of, I threw myself into the boxing and I was hyper focused on that. And then when I couldn't do that anymore, I wanted something else to kind of channel my sort of interest into, to keep myself busy. And not only that, I've lost countless amount of friends over the years, whether that be from the military, from the close protection industry to the fire service, through suicide. So I kind of thought, right, what can I do? I know there's a lot of podcasts out there. I had this idea, and I'm very, very stupid and very, very good at putting a good idea and sitting on it for too long. And when it would have been a good idea, I mean, I started doing, I digress, my brain again, but I started doing CrossFit back in 2006 and 2005 with the US soldiers in Iraq. No one had ever heard of it in the UK. And I was going to literally come home, do a course, set up a CrossFit gym, put it off. The next thing, it's exploded in the UK and I've missed it. So that's typically me, what happens. So I meant to start a kind of podcast before lockdown. I thought about it. And obviously it would have been massive in lockdown because I could have interviewed loads of people and loads of guests, but I didn't. So the time came sort of February last year and I thought, right, I'm going to have a go at it. To raise awareness for mental health and just get people talking about stuff. I have my own selfish reasons for it. I mean, I get to talk to interesting people. Yeah. And I find that absolutely fascinating, people's different stories and life journeys. I genuinely do. It was never really a financial sort of thing behind it. And that's genuinely, I'm not about that kind of stuff. But look, we're all looking to make money somewhere or another. So if there will be in the future a financial gain from it, then I'm all for that.
Yeah. But you do it because you love it.
I do it because I genuinely enjoy it. And I think if I wasn't enjoying it, certainly with me, if I wasn't enjoying it, I wouldn't be doing it. It's as simple as that. I assume you kind of feel the same about
that. Absolutely. Well, during the pandemic, I started my YouTube channel and that kind of took off a little bit. But I noticed that the YouTube algorithms and all these algorithms, they like the same consistent talk over and over and over. They like or what's in the topics in demand at that time. Whether it's, for example, let's say a sportscaster, they need to talk about sports. If they talk about something outside the norm, their audience is not going to relate. And but my mind's kind of like your mind. I want to talk about a lot of different things. So I did this podcast. I was tired of doing my own videos, and yeah, there's no financial gain for me from it because there's so many, I think, podcast people out there, and some of them are so dedicated to it. They're getting more videos out, more clips. They're better editors, whatever it may be. For me, it's just listen. When else can I talk to a paratrooper that has a story to tell, or a Navy SEAL, or a MMA fighter, or a jiu-jitsu artist, or a real estate agent that sells $50 million homes, which I just had on, recently, right before you. So I love it. And, but I think what I tell myself is, whether you got to keep your mind busy, whether it is for financial gain or not, whatever it may be, if you have the time, do it. And I think with you and I or anybody else kind of doing our thing, 10, 15 years from now, we got something to do. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And it's like everyone has a hobby, and, I have a lot of other hobbies as well. But, with the way technology's come on, I can talk to you now like you're in the next room all the way from America. And, it's technology is brilliant. So you can manage it with other stuff, and I think that is a good thing. And I find doing them remotely as well. I do all mine remotely. I mean, I'd love to have a studio at some point, but I think it's easier for the guests as well. I mean, do you do some of yours in a studio as well?
I don't know if you'll check out my Instagram or our the Ideal Hour Instagram, but we built. So back in the day, we bought a building, and then I had all these rooms because no one would come in to work because of COVID and other things that happen in life, but. I built a studio, but I find that a lot more people love the remote podcast. The studio feels, I'll be honest with you, it feels more genuine. It feels more Like there's amplification to it. And I think that's why maybe some of the bigger podcasters only do in studio in person. Like, but those are people that are making a killing off it, or they're making an income, or that's their profession, right? They're not a firefighter on the side or a business owner or whatever. That's what they do. So they'll get a guest, like Donald Trump, or they'll get a guest like Ivanka Trump, or they'll get a guest like a professional MMA fighter, Dana White, whatever, or whoever I should say. And that is an in-person type podcast. But for the smaller podcasts, I think it's just a lot easier for remote. And I think it makes a lot more sense. No one wants to drive. They're not local. No one's going to fly out to sit in our studio at this point in time. And I'm okay with it. I think the conversation is just as good. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've reached out to quite a few celebrities. I actually had a phone call. I was dead chuffed, because I'm a boxing fan. Yeah. And I have boxed a bit myself, but I got a phone call 3 days ago, all the way from LA airport, from 𝐒𝐢𝐕𝐬 𝐁𝐢𝐬. After he saw my message on Instagram, which I was surprised because he's got like over 1 million followers, and he saw my message. And I have been pestering him a bit, but he actually rang me because I sent him a number. So I was like a little boy on Christmas Eve talking to 𝐒𝐢𝐕𝐬 𝐁𝐢𝐬.
Oh, he's a big deal.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, it was only a couple of minute phone call, but I was like trying to play it cool. If he sees this, I was trying to play it cool, and I think I pulled it off. But obviously, I've exposed myself now and told everyone. But yeah, he was going to come on the podcast, but I think that's kind of now he may have changed his mind. That it is what it is. But yeah, I got to speak to him. But the same as you, I like to have a variety of guests on and interesting stories. And look, I'd be lying that if they said I'd like to make it a full-time thing and want to do it in a studio. That'd be amazing. But this works for me, and it obviously works for you doing and fitting into your lifestyle. So and if I can share the positivity and shed a bit of mental health kind of awareness, then it's a win-win for me.
I don't, people that don't come on, I never take it personally anymore. I've had people flake and bail out, and I've had people like, how much are you going to pay me to come on? And I'm like, I was like, hey, I'm not going to pay you anything and I respect their time. I say, I just don't pay because I don't make money off it. Maybe if you go on a crazy podcast, you could get paid. I've had like ex-mafia members like, hey, I charge, $500 an hour. And then I've had another mafia member that's like, hey, I got a story to tell. I worked with Luciano and these other big time mobsters. He's an old man. It was really funny. And he designated his time or dedicated his time, and I appreciate it. And it's a business or it's a hobby, right? We need to decide that at one point or another. Yeah. And hopefully 𝐒𝐢𝐴𝐻𝐴 does come on your podcast. I would love to see that.
Oh, that would make my day. I said to him when I spoke to him, well, you've certainly made my year so far, because like having grown up watching 𝐒𝐢𝐴𝐻𝐴 box and stuff, I was like, and like I said, I'm sure my voice went really high pitched on the phone.
He's like, who is this? He didn't recognize it. He's probably like, who is this on the other end? That's funny. All right, as we wrap up here, I always ask everybody, obviously we'll link your podcast. I hope people go follow you. I think you got some crazy stories to tell. Every life experience is unique, and yours is like pretty interesting, especially with all the tours you've did with I love how you overcame the third try to become a paratrooper. So there's a lot of diversity, and I think you have a lot of value to add personally, if whatever that's worth for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll link everything. If you could go back in time, and aside from saying I'd probably buy Bitcoin, but if you could go back in time and tell yourself a piece of advice or something, what would that be, man? You could be any age, any moment in life.
I think, touching on what we said there, I've had quite a few ideas in the past that I've not, out of fear more than anything else, because you've got to take a leap and kind of do something. And I think that's the advice I'd give to my younger self. And if I was to go back in time, it's like, if you have an opportunity or an idea and you think it's, regardless of what people say, roll with it. and see how it turns out. You don't have to plow everything into it, but have a go at it, because you never know. When I started and I told everyone I was doing a podcast, everyone was like, yeah, we'll see how that goes. And, you know, look, I'm not saying my following's massive or anything, but it's growing quite a lot. I've been going sort of 8 or 9 months. I've got like nearly 2,500 followers on subscribers on YouTube, and it is kind of moving. But every single guest, my first guest was Lucas Brown, former heavyweight champion of the world from Australia. So, you know, and then that was through pestering him. I think he took out a stalking order against me, as have many of the guests.
But you know what? That's the way to get them on, man. They're not, you know, that's what you got to do.
If you got to pester, and I always apologize to them. I say, look, I'm sorry for pestering you, but the messages get missed. And then they come back to me and say, no, it's no dramas at all. I've just been really, really busy, and everything else. But yeah, it'd be certainly that. It'd be jump on the opportunities that pop into your head. If they work, they do. If they don't, then it is what it is. You've learned a lesson. But that's the advice of me.
So I guess to your point, take risks. You could have had the biggest CrossFit, but now you're going to have the biggest podcast in the future. So it doesn't
Thanks
matter.
for reminding me, Nick. That's all good.
But it's okay, man. In life, everything happens for a reason. Now you learned, and you know, listen. Just keep pushing the podcast. Maybe one day we both get to interview Sugar Shane or whoever else, Dana White, or you know. For me, I'd love to interview Dana White. I think he's an incredible businessman. You know, that'd be a good interview. Elon Musk is an interesting one, I would say, given what he's done and kind of where he's going. But yeah, there's so many people. I think we would make a crazy list. We could probably go on for hours talking about who we'd like to interview.
Oh man, you know, it is, and obviously but I'd love to speak to Mike Tyson, and you know, I grew up listening to him before you could watch them in America, his fights in the 80s and 90s and that, and listening with my dad to Mike Tyson fight Frank Bruno and the likes of, and to have Iron Mike on and have a chat with him.
Beast.
I don't know what I'd say. I'd probably sit here kind of dribbling or something and like slurring, but I mean, it'd be good to sit and talk to him anyway. You know?
He's a beast, man. And he's actually a really nice guy if you don't disrespect him. He's like very humble, and you know, he's $20 million richer after the Jake Paul fight, of course. Kudos to him. I think he held back a little bit on that fight. I'm just saying, but
he held back a lot. But
but hey, Mike, you better come on the old Paratrooper podcast. It'll make Chris's dream come true. And
you know what? Yeah, I'd love that. I'm not going to hold any hopes on that, but you never know.
You never know, man. You never know. In life, it's so weird like that, and I think you've experienced it yourself too. Chris, man, thanks so much for coming on. We'll again link your podcast, the old Paratrooper podcast. I'm a fan. Anything you ever need, you let me know. Appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your story and then spending some time with me here on the Ideal Hour. Maybe one day I'll come on your podcast and you could reverse question me. And I don't have as cool stories to tell. It's just a city kid running around the city, but that's about it.
No, anytime. Look, I'd more than be happy to have you on my podcast, pal, as a guest. And I just want to say as well, I meant to say it at the start, but again, my brain goes off at tennis. But I really like what you're doing with the podcast. And I think my favorite episode so far is with Jimmy Watson, the former Navy SEAL. I watched that one, and you know, I like what you're doing. It's a similar sort of setup to what I've got going on, a variety of different guests. As long as they've got an interesting story, and you think, you know, it's a good thing, you know.
Jimmy's a nice guy. You should get him on. He's got stories and he's got that energy. And you know, I asked him how many man makers he could do because he always puts it on his Instagram, and that was a tough question for him because he's like, man, on a good day, 100, you know. But he's been through stuff, man. That guy's gotten, you know, he represented America, and then he's gotten the FBI coming after him at one point, and there's the Blackwater thing, and he's been through stuff in the past, and I think you should, if you need an introduction with Jimmy, you just let me know. He's a really, really nice guy, personally, from what I've experienced. So definitely a good podcast. I've had him on twice because we talked about Trump's security after he almost got assassination attempt. And Jimmy's like, I don't know what these people are doing. First of all, that woman can't carry this big 6'4" guy. You know, how are they protecting him and this and that? And I was like, man, go off, Jimmy, go off on it. You know, so it was just fun. Well,
yeah, point him in my direction, definitely.
I will. I'll send him a message today, and feel free to reach out to him as well. I'll message him and then just reach out, and if he has the time, and he's fun to have on, man. You'll enjoy that conversation. I think you guys are will relate because you're in the same type of space too, you know. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for coming on. There you have it, folks. Do give Chris a follow. Subscribe to him on YouTube. The Old Paratrooper podcast is something he loves doing. He's a firefighter. He's done quite a lot in life and done some tours. Check out his podcast to see some of the stories he'll share. I know in 1 hour we can't cover everything, but he probably has a lot of great stories. So thank you, Chris, for coming on.
My pleasure, pal. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.